There's an interesting depiction of quantum computing as, being a little thing about this big that comes up from a little chandelier. Kind of close, but not great. But quantum's been in sci-fi forever.
Maybe there are some opportunities here. There are many companies looking at this space. But really, the thought is to solve really game-changing problems. They're really hard. And they're problems that maybe are not possible to solve on a classical computer.
Welcome to the first episode of this Common Factor series. Today we're speaking to quantum computing experts. Welcome everyone. Thank you for being here today. I really appreciate you spending some time with us. I know you're all busy people, so thank you very much. Now, Maja, I want to start with you, and I want to talk around quantum computing and someone that's only really familiar with classical computers as well. So I can't pretend to be an expert in quantum computing at all. That's why we're speaking to you guys today. What's a compelling analogy or metaphor you could use to highlight the unique aspects of quantum technology? Maybe.
Right. So in a classical computer, you write a program, and it's executing a set of instructions and it's giving an answer to that set of instructions. Quantum computing works on probabilities. And so one analogy you could use is that you're trying to find an answer to a solution like exploring a maze, and that in a classical computer, you'll have to try each one of these paths sequentially, potentially to get an answer. A quantum computer, when you're running a quantum algorithm, will explore them, but then give a probability, a weighted probability of which is the right answer. And as you continue to run that over and over again, you will then get more confidence on what that answer to the problem is.
And it's something that I'm fascinated by, honestly, and that's why we're excited to have you guys here today. Now, Simon, I want to talk to you as well. Quantum computing has often been featured in science fiction as well. Is there a particular sci-fi depiction of quantum technology that you find maybe inspiring or intriguing?
I mean, quantum itself has showed up in a lot of science fiction. Quantum computing a little bit more recently, and not great depictions of it. I suppose the latest ones people might be aware of is there was an episode of Black Mirror in the last season where Netflix-y type episodes were being generated on the fly from massive data collection and quantum computers. There's an interesting depiction of quantum computing as, being a little thing about this big that comes up from a little chandelier. Kind of close, but not great. But quantum's been in sci-fi forever.
Yeah.
The Marvel universe is one example that's going on right now, but the one I remember growing up, and I suppose it was a little bit of an inspiration to get into physics, was an old show in the 90s, I don't know if people ever saw it, called Sliders, that was about this grad student, of all things, who decided to build an anti-gravity or try to build an anti-gravity device, and then figured out how to make wormholes through to parallel universes. And all the episodes were like jumping through and, what if the Soviets took over the world, or what if the Americans never had the Revolutionary War, and how history plays out. And I thought that, in terms of quantum technology itself, it was, of course, science fiction taking a little liberty with the technology, but the underlying sort of ideas behind quantum theory, especially the many worlds interpretation, was certainly there. And I mean, for a more recent example, I just finished watching that new Apple show, Dark Matter, which is all about that. And they get some very interesting aspects of it correct. The guy's, spoiler alert for people who are watching and haven't seen this show yet, the guy, the scientist involved, he builds a giant box that's just completely isolated from everything at the quantum mechanical level. And that's exactly what hardware engineers are trying to build with these systems. Yeah. I mean, he does it in such a way that when he gets into the box, he can then travel to multiple universes. But they get some aspects of the science right.
Yeah.
Especially with that kind of interpretation. So we're starting to see sort of quantum computing and quantum technology show up in science fiction more often because the technology's there. In fact, I double-checked the other day what's the first instance I can remember seeing, and it was actually in a Dan Brown book, so the Da Vinci Code, the one he did before it in 1998, where it's about cryptography and breaking codes, and he says the National Security Agency in the US has access to a quantum computer.
Yes.
And it's like, this is in 1998. And it's like, well, you know, the NSA is pretty secretive, but I'm pretty sure they didn't have a quantum computer in 1998.
It's interesting as well to think that sometimes they do get it right in sci-fi and sometimes they do take those liberties as well. I mean, Amanda, have you thought of any kind of instances where you've seen it in sci-fi as well and it's popped up for you or intrigued you as well?
I think at my current stage, I watch these things and then it's just interesting to pick it apart and go, that's maybe not necessarily correct. Yes. I don't agree with that. I was also watching what was the last one you mentioned?
Dark Matter.
Dark Matter, yeah. And it's more the graphics that are exciting because it's like these people are trying to interpret these complicated scientific things and then make it visual for an audience to accept and enjoy. And it's very fun just to watch. Like, oh, what does entanglement look like? Oh, a sphere, that's black. Like, that doesn't mean anything, but I think it's interesting.
Yes.
You watched the last bit of it? I thought they got really interestingly correct. You know, the guy gets kidnapped and then he comes back to his own universe and then it starts getting flooded with like infinite copies of himself that have come from other universes that have diverged.
I haven't seen that.
I just spoiled it for you. I'm sorry. It's really good the way they tackled it.
Yeah, 100%. Look, let's talk about what drew you all to quantum computing in the first place. Mahendra, talk me through how you found yourself in this space, especially with your extensive background in AI ethics and governance as well.
Yeah, so now AI and quantum computing has some relationship even though we straight away not see that relationship, we going into fundamental level because we are in quantum mechanics, relativity, we are looking into most fundamental level of our understanding. So in AI, we look into the data. Now, when we model human data, we know based on the icebergs model that human data is just the tip of the iceberg, that quite large amount of data is below the surface of the level. Our thought, emotions, values, they are not visible. Because of that, now in future, human brain-computer interface come, and that will reveal quite a lot of data. So there are like broad connections, AI, brain-computer interface, hard problem of consciousness, and quantum mechanics. And they are, when we are looking into ethics and fundamental ethics and sustainability in the fundamental level, we can see that relationship.
And I want to talk to Simon as well about maybe what drew you to the space too, and what are maybe some of the current challenges and advancements developing in the scalable quantum computing space?
I mean, I came into quantum computing through physics, which I think a lot of us did.
Yeah.
And to be 100% honest, Back to the Future got me into physics. I don't know why it did. It just sort of, it just spoke to me on some weird level about...
Another sci-fi reference there.
Well, it was, you know, both, you know, Back to the Future and time travel and Star Trek with warp drive. That sort of got me into it, and then I realised I wasn't smart enough to actually tackle those problems. And instead of going into high energy physics theory and experiment, I ended up in quantum technologies, which actually fit me a lot better because a lot of my work has been focused on sort of the design of these large scale systems and how you take, you know, what it's really going to take these systems out of the experimental lab and start thinking about industry. Certainly we're in our very, very first steps when it comes to most of these technologies, and we haven't actually hit the hurdles. Most of it's all capital. This is going to cost a lot of money no matter which system ends up being, you know, superior in the future. You know, it's not like silicon, it's not like classical technologies where it's, you know, are we going to do it with silicon, maybe gallium? In quantum, we've got 9 separate systems that are currently being built, and they're all completely different from each other. Some are based on particles of light, some are based on macroscopic superconducting circuits, some are single atoms. There's still a lot of questions that remain unanswered, both from the scientific side but also from the engineering side.
Yeah.
So scalability is a big thing. You know, we've got nascent quantum chips on the order of about, you know, 10 to 100 qubits, depending on who's building them. And pretty much all the estimates that we see from the theory community is you're going to require millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of qubits before you actually get to a system that's going to be commercially competitive.
Yep. This is actually the perfect time to bring in Maja actually as well. Talk us through, I guess, your thoughts on, I guess, what Simon's talked us through, but also the scalability of these models as well.
Right, yeah. So I think Simon mentioned something about that we can't map what's gone on in silicon classical computing to quantum so much. But I think in some ways you can, but you just have to look a lot further back in time in terms of where computer development was 100 years ago. The first patent for the transistor was in 1929.
Wow.
And it took almost 20 years beyond that, 15 years, for them to actually physically realize this device. And so the first computers, that people used were made of vacuum tubes. And so there were relatively large-scale computational tools made of a completely different technology than what we have today. But that evolution has taken a lot of time. So, making the first transistor, it was actually made of germanium, not of silicon. And it took, 15, 20 years from the first patented prototype of this idea that you could modulate the current flowing through some material with an external electric field. 20 years to make that first one. But it then took another 10 years to make the first integrated circuit, so transistors powering transistors. Another 20 years beyond that to think about VLSI computing.
Yeah.
And so what enabled that was not just having the ideas of the physics. We understood how the physics was working in these right at the beginning, but it took developments in chemistry, it took developments in material science, in manufacturing, and entire new material systems to evolve in order to get to this concept of an integrated circuit.
Yeah.
And even then, we're now in the 1980s, roughly, and we're now almost 50 years beyond that.
Yeah, and all of this requires a lot of investment as well, and that's the thing. So to be able to do all of these different stages and get to those different points in history, it's a lot of investment, a lot of changes in different industries as well.
Exactly, and a large number of people, just not the capital.
Large number of, yes, brains.
But people working on the problems. And so if we, once again map across to classical compute, these companies, Fairchild, Intel, working for decades with teams of thousands of engineers in order to get, products that could then, be bought and then, that capital reinvested into further R&D to make better systems.
Yes. And look, Amanda, I want to turn to you. What inspired you to focus on noise in silicon spin qubits?
I came in through physics. I just wanted to solve problems. That's just been my whole life, so that wasn't very surprising. But I think the reason I took the PhD in noise and spin qubits in silicon is because there's a lot of work still to be done for, I think, many hardwares in quantum computing from the research point of view. So how do we understand how these nanoscale devices are working? What are the different sources of noise that are coming in? And that's a very interesting physics problem. So I found that very exciting. But I think what's more important is that I actually want to stay in this field of research in, looking into quantum systems, which means still there is more work to do from the research point of view to understand what's going on at the fundamental level.
Yeah. And Maja, let's talk through maybe your experiences as well at Microsoft. I know you were at Microsoft for 6 years, and before that you were at Harvard as well. And how did that shape your quantum hardware, I guess your approach rather, to quantum hardware integration and research?
I'm interested in the transition between an idea and the implementation. So I'm looking for opportunities where there are well thought out ideas, but then it's waiting for the first prototypes. And so academia, that's what academia does. And as you mentioned, I spent quite a long time, after my studies, I went from UNSW to Harvard to do a PhD. I then moved to the Netherlands to QTech, which is one of the leading research centers for quantum computing. And around that time is when Microsoft and many large technology companies became very interested in quantum computing, and we were actually essentially bought by Microsoft to become their internal expert team. What I learned inside industry is that even with significant amounts of funds, there are real hard problems in this field that aren't necessarily going to be solved just by money alone. So money definitely helps.
Yes.
And especially in scaling, then once you know how to do something, making it 1% or 10% better every year.
Scaling
beyond
those
that,
models.
Improving processes. But what we need, and Simon said this before, over my career, the concept for the number of qubits and the quality of the qubits that you need has gone from maybe a few thousand qubits to now maybe a billion or 10 million or 100 million, something like
Let's
that.
be fair, the algorithms community kind of knew this 20 years ago.
Okay, but
And that's the thing. How much did you know when you were getting into this? Did you realise the scale of the?
I think that maybe the algorithms community maybe knew some of this stuff. I think there was more of a hope in the experimental community that you would be able to bring value sooner.
Yes.
And definitely there are a lot of people who are looking at that right now. Is what's the value we can get right now out of these smaller quantum systems? Is there something that they can do that is better than classical computing? And remember, we are competing against the world's largest supercomputers in order to solve these types of problems. We're not solving entirely new problems. We are trying to solve problems that are relevant to every business today. And so we have to compete with classical compute. There are some opportunities here. There are many companies looking at this space. But really, the thought is to solve really game-changing problems. They're really hard. And they're problems that maybe are not possible to solve on a classical computer. Because if you map that out into the number of computational clock cycles, it takes on order centuries or beyond to think about solving that sort of problem. And a quantum computer, maybe if you can build it big enough, it might be able to solve that problem in a year or a month. But as we make it, the fundamental building blocks of the quantum computer, these qubits, which is the quantum analogy to a classical bit, as we make them better, maybe we can reduce that time down from months or weeks to days and hours. And that's when we actually start to bring value to people, because businesses want answers to their problems, not on the scale of years.
Yes, 100%.
The problem changes, between when you start the computational cycle and when you get an answer. If you're only getting an answer several years later, probably you're not asking the right question anymore. And so we need to be able to deliver answers to people, and they need to be good answers. We need to do it fast. And that's where the real challenge of this technology is, building big enough systems with good enough performance to give answers quickly.
Yeah, and it's a really good point that you bring up as well, because I think we often work with these companies that are interested in emerging technologies, but they want questions or answers to their questions rather pretty quickly. I know for a fact. But Mahendra, I want to bring you into the conversation and just talk through your expertise in AI, as we've said. How's that influenced your research and understanding of quantum computing, just the fundamentals and the algorithms as well?
Yeah, so quantum paradigm is something completely different to classical computer. So that it's bring that something that which we can't solve in a millions of years in a normal classic computer, that quantum computer can perhaps solve instantly, right? So that's the advantage of quantum computer coming from the quantum superposition and quantum mechanics concepts, right? Ultimately, I believe quantum computing, it has certain advantages in optimization, cybersecurity, and biology, chemistry, pharmaceutical, which all in line with social impact.
And I know Simon's got a little model that that you usually show as an educational piece, don't you?
Yes, so this is one of the first spin-outs of UTS, and this is it's an educational tool that we call the Quokka. So it's effectively a quantum computer. So it's what we call an emulator. So there's no special qubits or anything in here. This is all basically classical technology. But this is supposed to be a low-cost device, so it mimics a 30-qubit quantum computer that operates perfectly, and it's targeted towards education and training. Provides something at low cost, costs a couple $100. Shipping this September, if you want to get one of your own. But it's designed to mimic exactly how these real-world machines work.
Yep.
And exactly what how you would program a real quantum computer, whether it's from IBM, whether it's from Google, and allow you to start playing around. One of the motivations that we had, aside from we actually started using it in our classes at UTS, was you go back again to when computers became sort of consumer products, beyond sort of mainframe systems in the 50s and 60s and into, the 70s and the 80s. And you look at what people did, the famous examples, the Homebrew Computer Club with Wozniak and Jobs in California, where you would have access to cheap, kind of crappy hardware.
Yeah.
Because it was cheap. You're obviously not getting the state of the art, but it was something that you could afford, but something that was very limited in capability. And it was like, figure out what to do with it. Yep. I mean, again, quantum computing is born out of the physics community.
Yeah.
Physicists aren't program developers. Physicists aren't software engineers. Physicists are physicists.
Yeah.
So getting it out there and certainly proliferating, the ideas of quantum computing or quantum technology to, quite frankly, a generation of students that are going to have to become quantum literate this century, the same way that you were digitally literate when we were growing up. I think is a great thing. And certainly companies like Microsoft and IBM and Google have tried over the last 8 to 10 years to start putting systems on the cloud and start trying to bring in a larger community. That's still something that's growing. And certainly education is one of the big focuses I think a lot of companies have, because there is a market for it at the moment. Certainly the computers that we have are too small to provide, commercial advantage to HPC users. That's going to take a lot longer. So a lot of the investment that you're starting to see in quantum is either coming through basically government procurement, national strategies, big investments from government. We saw it in Australia recently with the PsiQuantum deal up in Queensland, that kind of thing. Or a lot of companies are also pivoting to education and saying, okay, how do we bring quantum into schools? And it doesn't have to just be for quantum computing or learning, how to be a physicist to build these machines. A lot of what we see in STEM education is pedagogy that's 100 years old. Learning quantum mechanics from, okay, I'm going to take the Bohr model and I'm going to take the hydrogen atom and solve the Schrodinger equation, et cetera, et cetera. Kids grow up these days with information theory as their core concept.
It's amazing what kids can do at such a young age.
It is. I mean, one of my colleagues, Chris Ferry, who's quite well known for his, children's books and sort of outreach efforts, he tells these great stories about a couple of years ago, the Nobel Prize was won for experiments in quantum mechanics related to this thing called a Bell inequality and proving that quantum mechanics has properties that classical physics doesn't. You teach it from the physicist's point of view, and it's all Einstein's spooky action at a distance. And if you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. And all these famous quotes from the 1930s and the 1940s. Chris taught it from the perspective of information processing. It was a game. It was a programming game. And the kids got it like that. Wasn't any confusion, wasn't, oh my God, my brain can't handle quantum mechanics. It's like, oh, that's how it works. That's obvious how it works. And that's all because, students these days are brought up in an information processing environment.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, whether you're talking about physics, chemistry, mathematics, most of it is something to do with information processing. Statistical gathering of information and understanding measurement quantities, or I want to calculate a trajectory or solve Einstein's equation. It's information processing, and kids really sort of attach onto that. So certainly with quantum technology and quantum computing, I think that's the angle that we have to push in the 21st century and leverage what kids are now used to because they grow up with iPhones and iPads and...
Yeah.
everything they grow up with now.
And you mentioned a really great point as well around digital literacy is something that we pretty much all our kids have these days.
It's a given. We don't talk about digital literacy programs anymore. It's just baked into the pie.
Yes. I want to talk around, you mentioned though, quantum literacy as well, and maybe that's something that we'll look towards having or instilling in our kids as we go and as we continue in the STEM and focusing on STEM projects and STEM subjects as well. I mean, Maja, obviously working in academia, it's key that people have a certain level of literacy in this as well, isn't it? Even when coming into the field and first deciding to study this.
Yeah, but I think, as Simon said, many things can be mapped across to skills that they already have or are developing. You know, quantum computing, you know, it's building the hardware is electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering. These are things that people are being taught already, but it's just a new combination, a new application of these particular core skills. And similarly, quantum algorithms. It's just another type of algorithm.
Yeah.
And our students need to have these fundamentals across the basic sciences and engineering, in programming, for example. And then quantum is just one application of that.
Yes.
It's not something totally new, and it's not, I think, something in competition to the standard curriculum or the undergraduate education. It is just another application.
I think it's fantastic as well to see female representation at the table too, because I know, Maja, you're part of Quantum Women as well. So talk us through, I guess, how important that is to you to make sure we have that kind of gender representation in the field too.
I think gender representation across all of STEM is something that we need to work on in Australia in particular. But what I can say for quantum is that as more jobs and more career options become available to people, then it's really starting to become, we're seeing more of a change.
Yeah.
And I can see that in our undergraduate cohorts at UNSW. We have with the world's first undergraduate degree in quantum engineering. I'm actually going off to teach one of the classes in that course straight after this. And we're seeing as these specialist programs emerge. They're very high profile, get a lot of attention, but also there are now a lot of jobs. So the career trajectory is not just to become an academic researcher. There are jobs in government policy, in corporate research, in end user applications where people need these sort of deep skills and understandings that is got through dedicated training programs. And just because of the number of options now, I think we're starting to see a change here.
Which is great.
Which is fantastic, exactly. Yeah. And I think things are changing, and it's around where there are jobs and careers.
I think that's the thing, is industry is opening up to these possibilities as well. And we work with a number of businesses at Factor too, and end users as well, but in shaping their technology strategies, especially through partnering them with the right vendors. But Simon, I want to bring you into the conversation quickly. And how do you advise multinational companies and governments on integrating quantum technology and talking about actually bringing it into their systems as well? Where does that advice start and end for you?
Well, for me, it's usually don't. I mean, it's not. You have to. The industry has to pace itself, and we have to grow at a rate that is commensurable with the value that we're providing. Now, government investment is a lot different than private sector investment. Certainly, when quantum sort of moved a bit out of the labs in sort of 2013, 2014. A lot of, especially the startups, got a lot of revenue coming through effectively what were glorified consulting contracts, where you look at end user possibilities. It could be, Boeing or BMW or General Motors or the banks or whatever sector you want to look at. It's like, what is this? I'm hearing all this stuff about quantum and providing computational advantage and beating our competitors and blah, blah, blah. So a lot of the revenue that was generated in those first maybe 10 years or so was really about trying to ascertain what is the status of the technology, what can be done with it, what is the scale that we have today versus the scale that we need. JP Morgan is not building a quantum computer. JP Morgan is a customer of a quantum computer. So they want to know, when can I start making billions and billions of dollars by paying Microsoft or AWS or some startup access to their machine? That's what they are interested in. And that's a much longer horizon with regards to how the technology is developing and what we understand about quantum. And that kind of revenue is starting to dry up because a lot of these end users are saying, okay, it's interesting, but not for us right now. We're going to have to wait 10 or 20 years for the technology to catch up. But government's a completely different story. For government, pretty much everywhere, it's a strategic investment. Every major country these days has a national strategy of varying sizes, reaching into the tens of billions of dollars. If you're looking at countries like China, the United States, the European Union, even smaller economies or developing economies have dedicated strategies.
And where does Australia sit in that as well, do you think? Or is there a bit of a quantum race?
Well, we were really good early on. Our national strategy did not commit funding to the Australian ecosystem in the same way that the United States or the European Union did. So far, our largest investment in quantum has been PsiQuantum, which is effectively a loan and equity deal to a US company that was founded by 2 Australians. We've got some smaller programs that have developed over the last 12 to 18 months. The Australian Centre for Quantum Growth, which is now called Quantum Australia, got about $18 million in the last federal budget to establish itself as sort of an ecosystem growth mechanism. And in Sydney, you've got things like the Sydney Quantum Academy, which was partly funded by the state government and the 4 universities in Australia. But comparatively speaking, we have not invested the same way that pretty much every major economy has. There's been a very limited amount of investment in the academic space, which is where so much of the foundational research that's going to have to go into scalable quantum computing is going to come from. And while we do have sort of a burgeoning startup space, it really consists of about 5 companies at the moment, 5 startups. Whereas you look at the United States or you look at the UK or France or Germany, the startups are measuring in the dozens, if not hundreds. So Australia does have a lot more work to do to ensure that the early investments that Maja mentioned in the 2000s, where we got going really fast and really early, does not simply get drowned out and crowded out by the rest of investment that's going on in countries that are not Australia.
Yeah, it sounds like we've got a fair bit to go as well. And look, that brings me to the end of the session. I know we could talk about this all day. And look, I wanted to hear from every one of you. So thank you so much for joining us today on this session on quantum computing and our first Common Factor series. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.